The Whispers in the Dark by Angela F. So I had to go to Rome for work last April and stayed in one of those old hotels they say is super Italian. It was near Via Giulia, right between an art gallery and a church that looked half empty. The building was old, with really thick walls, high ceilings, and a bunch of old furniture. Some of it was real, some of it just looked old. The room was pretty basic. Big windows looking out at an empty courtyard, old cracked floors, and this huge wooden wardrobe that smelled like cleaning stuff. At night it got quiet except for some scooters and the wind messing with the shutters. I figured it would be a good place to catch up on sleep. My first night there, I woke up because I thought I heard somebody whisper my name. It wasn't loud, it was just really close, like right next to my ear. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and looked around. Nothing. The curtains were moving a bit, even though the window was closed. I just waited a bit, told myself I was dreaming, and turned the light off again. After a few seconds, I heard whispering again. This time it was longer and sounded like more than one person, but I couldn't understand anything. I put my hand on the wall to see if it was just noise from another room, but it was cold and quiet. Strangely, though, the whispers stopped as soon as I touched the wall. The next morning, I told the lady at the front desk about it. She just smiled politely like she'd heard it before and said, "Old walls, you know. They make weird noises. It's part of the charm." That night, just after midnight, the whispers came back. At first, it almost sounded like singing or chanting, but really quiet. I turned on the lamp and everything stopped right away. The air felt weird, kind of heavy. I just left the light on all night after that. By the third night, I stayed up just to see if it would happen again. Of course, around the same time, the whispering started. This time, it sounded like it was almost saying words in Italian, but never finished. I kind of held my breath, and the whispers got louder, like they knew I was listening. I tried recording it on my phone, but as soon as I hit record, the sound just turned into static. When I stopped, the whispers came back, this time from the corner by the wardrobe. I really didn't want to look, but I did anyway. It just looked normal. Some shadows, my coat, nothing weird. But the quiet still had that heaviness, like I could feel it in my chest. For a second, I thought I heard my name again, but it didn't sound like it was in the room. It was more like it was coming from somewhere else, almost like it was stuck in the walls. I grabbed my phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam hit the wardrobe's door. Its polished surface reflected a thin strip of light. And for less than a second, there was another silhouette behind mine in the reflection. A head turned toward me, and then disappeared. After that, I kept the lights on all night. I didn't hear anything else until morning. When I opened the window, a pigeon flew off and some dust went everywhere. It smelled kind of like paper. Really old paper. I tried to move to another room, but the hotel was fully booked. The clerk didn't question the request. She just said that she couldn't help me. That afternoon, I went walking through Trastevere just to be around people and noise. I planned to stay out until late so I wouldn't have to sit waiting for the dark. I came back at about 11, and my room key was gone from the desk. The clerk said no one else had it, but I didn't have it, and it wasn't there. She just gave me a spare. When I got upstairs, my door was open, which of course made me super uncomfortable. Nothing was disturbed inside, but my suitcase sat open on the bed, clothes folded neatly, much neater than I'd left them. On top of everything lay my notebook, opened to a blank page. The pen I had used earlier was uncapped beside it, ink smeared faintly across the paper, as if someone had pressed down without writing. I almost left right then, but running didn't feel safe either. I sat on the chair under the light, waiting. At some point, exhaustion won and my eyes shut. When I woke up at dawn, the lamp had flickered off on its own. Everything was still. The whispers hadn't come back. When I was checking out, the young porter asked me in English if I had heard anything weird. I just stared at him, kind of confused. He shrugged and said, "It always happens in room 8. It's the oldest part of the house. Voices tend to stay there. I don't know, I've just heard things. Thought I would ask." I asked if they knew who the voices were. He just smiled and said, "No one alive." A Haunting in Rome by Maria. I stayed in Rome for a week last summer doing the whole tourist circuit. Vatican, Colosseum, gelato twice a day, all of it. I booked a room at a well-known historic hotel near Via Veneto because I wanted the cliché old European charm experience. Marble floors, red velvet curtains, wrought iron balconies. It looked luxurious in photos and slightly haunted in person. The first 2 nights were normal. The room was quiet, the bed comfortable, and the courtyard outside stayed peaceful after dark. Nothing creepy, nothing strange. The hotel had a faint old building smell, but that's just Rome being Rome. Night 3 is when everything changed. I'd gotten back to my room late after wandering around Trastevere. The hotel was quiet. Long hallways, thick carpeting, muffled footsteps. I showered and climbed into bed, scrolled on my phone until I got tired, and then turned off the lights. At some point, I drifted into that half-asleep kind of phase, where your thoughts barely make sense. I wasn't dreaming yet, but I wasn't fully awake either. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was full pressure and cold. It felt wet, even though it was dry, if that makes any sense. Fingers, too. 5 distinct points, pressing just enough to be unmistakably human. I froze completely. I had that instinctive burst of terror that you get when you think someone has broken in. My brain did this rapid-fire checklist. Did I lock the door? Did someone sneak in? Is this a dream? Is someone actually standing behind me? The hand stayed there for 2, maybe 3 seconds. When I finally snapped out of it, I turned fast, like whiplash fast. There was no one. The room was still. It was dark and silent except for my breathing, which was practically panting at this point. The curtains didn't move. The air didn't shift. But the cold stayed. Not on my shoulder anymore, but behind me, like someone had stepped back but hadn't actually left. The temperature felt like I'd opened a freezer door in the middle of the night. I reached for the lamp. My hand shook so badly I knocked it over before finally getting it on. The room lit up and everything looked exactly the same as it had when I'd gone to bed. Except that spot of air behind me felt thick. I don't really know how else to phrase it. It was heavy, charged, like someone was standing close enough that if I turned my head, I would bump into them. But I could see nothing. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright against the headboard, lights on, covers pulled up to my chest. I kept telling myself I'd just been half asleep, or maybe my arm fell asleep and I misinterpreted the sensation. But that cold hand had felt too real. The next morning at breakfast, the waiter saw the dark circles under my eyes and joked that the spiriti del palazzo were keeping me up. He laughed, but his expression afterward was not entirely playful. It was one of those half-jokes people make when they're testing to see how much you'll believe. That stuck with me. I tried to shake it off the next day with sightseeing and wine and sunlight, the usual distractions. By the time I got back to the hotel that night, I had convinced myself it was a sleep paralysis moment, or nerves, or just travel exhaustion. That resolve lasted until about 2 a.m. I wasn't asleep yet. I was reading, fully awake, when I suddenly felt the temperature drop. Immediately, not like a gradual cooling. The air on the right side of the bed went icy. I held still. Then the pressure returned. Not a full hand this time, just fingertips, light and testing, pressing into the top of my shoulder as if confirming I was real. I turned again, slowly this time, because jerking around hadn't helped me the first time. There was no one, just that freezing pocket of air inches from me. I got out of bed and went to the other side of the room. The cold did not follow. It stayed by the bed, like a person standing silently in one spot. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning I asked the front desk, very casually, trying to sound like it was nothing, if any historical events had taken place in the room I was staying in. The woman at the desk glanced at my room number, hesitated long enough to make me uncomfortable, and then changed the subject. I asked if I could switch rooms. She didn't even ask why. She just nodded and handed me a different key. I turned mine in later. The new room was on another floor, with newer carpeting and newer furniture and none of that heavy old world feeling. I slept fine there. No cold spots or touches or weird sensations. But the next afternoon, as I was coming back from a museum, I saw a cleaning cart parked outside my old room. The housekeeper was inside, door propped open, vacuum running. Just as I walked by, the vacuum cut out, and a loud thump came from inside the room, like something heavy falling. The housekeeper rushed out, pale, and muttered something under her breath that included gelido, icy, and ombre, shadows. She didn't go back inside right away, and I didn't ask any questions. I finished my trip without incident. Rome was beautiful in that dreamlike way it always is. The experience faded the way scary things do when you're surrounded by sunlight and tourists and noise, and then I flew home. And that's the end of the story, really. It might not be as dramatic as some other stories, but it sure stayed with me. I still wonder who was touching me in the middle of the night, whose hand was on my shoulder, and what they wanted. The Vanishing Carriage. I stayed in an old hotel near Via Borghese during a short trip to Rome. It wasn't a fancy place, just one of those aging historic buildings with stone floors, arched hallways, and a courtyard that probably looked exactly the same 100 years ago. The front gate opened onto a narrow cobblestone street, lined with tall sycamores. They glowed golden under the street lamps at night. It was really pretty. Rome is loud during the day. At night, though, the neighborhoods around the park get strangely quiet. It's kind of eerie. You hear one scooter in the distance, maybe a dog barking, and then nothing for blocks. The first night, around midnight, I was reading on the little terrace attached to my room. At some point, a sound distracted me and pulled me out of my book. It was the unmistakable clop of hooves on stone. It sounded steady, kind of like an old-fashioned horse-drawn carriage making a slow pass. I set my book down and leaned over the railing. Sure enough, just beyond the hotel's front gate, a carriage rolled along the street. Dark wood, lanterns on either side, an actual horse pulling it. It felt like watching a scene out of another century. I figured it was a tourist thing. Rome does historic carriage tours, although I'd never seen them this far from the main attractions. Still, it looked real enough, maybe even more detailed than the ones I'd seen near the Colosseum. The horse's coat looked dark and glossy under the streetlight, and I could see the harness straps shifting as it walked. The carriage slowed as it approached the hotel gate, and then came to a full stop. No one stepped out. No driver turned around. The lanterns flickered, warm and soft, like they were actually burning oil instead of running on battery. I watched for a good 20 seconds, waiting for someone to appear. But the carriage just sat there, perfectly still, like it was waiting for something. I had this strange urge to go down and see it up close. I hesitated a moment, then grabbed my key, headed down the stairs, and stepped into the courtyard. I mean, when in Rome, right? But by the time I reached the gate and pushed it open, the street was empty. I walked a few steps into the street, telling myself it must have turned a corner fast, even though it had only taken me maybe 15 seconds to get downstairs. I checked both ends of the block, but there was nothing there except parked cars and a street lamp. Back upstairs, I tried to talk myself out of feeling weird about it. Rome is old. Weird stuff happens in old cities. Maybe I misheard. Maybe I didn't see it right. Maybe it wasn't a horse at all. All the stupid things you tell yourself when you're trying not to freak out. Those explanations lasted until the second night. This time, it was a little past 1 in the morning. I was brushing my teeth when I heard the same sound. Hooves, carriage wheels, lanterns clinking gently as the horse trotted forward. I stepped out onto the terrace. The carriage came from the exact same direction, rolling past the same tree, lanterns glowing the same honey-colored light. Again, it slowed when it reached the gate. Again, it stopped. I felt that same pull in my chest, like a hand closing neatly around my ribs, nudging me toward the stairs. Instead of going down there immediately, I watched closely. I couldn't see any driver or passenger. The reins moved slightly, though, as if an invisible person was at them. The horse flicked its ears, responding to something I couldn't see. And then, without warning, both lanterns dimmed, as though somebody had pinched the flames between their fingers. I backed into my room and shut the glass door, but I still watched. The carriage sat there a while longer, and then, when I looked again, it was gone. On the third night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat on the terrace with the lights off, listening. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. Nothing. I almost relaxed. Around 2:40 a.m., my phone buzzed with a random notification, and right as the screen lit up, I heard the hooves again, but faster this time. Not a steady walk, more like a trot edging toward a run. I stood and looked down. The carriage barreled down the street, moving far faster than a horse should on slick cobblestones. No sound from the wheels beyond the initial clatter, though. Just the hooves pounding in a weird rhythmic pattern that didn't really match the horse's actual movement. It reached the hotel gate and stopped so abruptly that the horse should have slipped, but it didn't. It just froze mid-stride, one hoof hovering just above the ground. I know how insane this sounds, but the shadows didn't line up. The lantern light cast silhouettes that didn't match the horse's legs or the wheels or anything. The shadows seemed a half second behind the actual movements. And then the lanterns didn't dim. they just went out completely, like someone had snapped their fingers. I bolted inside and shut the terrace door. I sat on the bed, my hands shaking, listening for the sound of a carriage leaving, but I never heard it. You would expect to hear hooves or wheels or something, but I never heard any of that. I didn't check again until morning. When I opened the terrace door, the street looked normal, except for one thing. There were faint scuff marks on the stones outside the gate. 2 long, shallow grooves, the exact width of carriage wheels. It looked fresh, like something heavy had dragged through the night before. I checked out that afternoon, even though I'd paid for the full week. The woman at the desk asked if everything was okay, and I just told her I needed to change locations. She gave me this weird look, like she could see in my eyes that I had experienced something. As she handed me the printed receipt, she said quietly, "You know, some guests prefer the newer buildings. The streets here hold some old memories." Last week, I was going through my photos on my phone trying to clear storage. I found one that I didn't remember taking. My room, the open terrace door, and the street below. The file was corrupted and looked like mostly static. But near the bottom, buried in the distortion, you can see 2 faint lantern glows and the outline of a carriage wheel right at the gate. The eerie laugh. I spent a semester in Rome a few years back when I thought studying abroad would fix all of my personality flaws. It didn't, obviously, but I did end up with one experience I've never been able to shake. I don't talk about it much, because it kind of sounds like what you would say if you were exaggerating after a few drinks. But I'm totally sober, and this happened exactly the way I remember it. There's a place in the southern part of the city called Via dei Quintili, one of those sprawling ruin sites that sits just far enough outside the center that tourists don't crowd it. Not the way they do the Forum, anyway. Part of it was an emperor's estate, and part of it later became a weird little command post, and then it was just left there. Open fields and broken stone walls and bits of mosaic hidden under dirt. During the day, it's calm and beautiful. At night, it's another story. I wasn't supposed to be there at night. You're technically not allowed, but students bend rules when they're lonely and bored and have too much free time. It was late October, warmish day, cool night. Rome has this dry chill that settles in after sundown. I'd gone out to clear my head after a lousy day, some roommate drama, a bad grade, whatever. I took the bus most of the way, and then walked. The moon was bright enough that the ruins looked almost silver. You'd think that would make it less creepy, but it actually makes everything look more exposed, like you're being watched from all angles. I climbed over a low section of fencing and stepped onto one of the old stone paths. The grass on either side was tall and dry, brushing against my jeans as I walked. The air had that dusty smell I still associate with Italy. Stone and old earth, warm days fading into cold nights. I walked between 2 crumbling walls, more like outlines of buildings than actual structures. I kept hearing the faint buzz of traffic from the Appian Way behind me, but it softened the farther I went, until all I could hear was my own footsteps. I wasn't scared. Not yet. It was just peaceful. I reached this large open area, one of the old courtyards, and stopped to sit on a flat stone slab. I remember thinking how surreal it was to be sitting where emperors hosted parties centuries ago. I didn't take any pictures, I just sat there, breathing and listening. And that's when I heard the laugh. It wasn't loud or theatrical or cartoonish. It was this sharp, sudden little huff of a laugh, like someone stifling it behind a hand. A real human laugh, male, and way too close. It came from directly behind me. I whipped around so fast I almost fell off the stone. But nothing. Just open space, ruins, grass, and moonlight. My first thought was that someone else had snuck in, maybe another student, maybe somebody messing with me, although I hadn't seen a soul the entire walk in. I waited and listened hard. The ruins amplify sound kind of weirdly. A bird can sound like it's right behind you when it's actually 50 feet away. I tried to tell myself that's what happened. But the laugh didn't echo. It didn't really bounce off of anything. It sounded like someone standing inches away from the back of my neck and had realized they'd been caught. I stood up and scanned the entire courtyard. The moon was bright enough that I could see the grass ripple when the wind hit. No one was around. I walked to the edge of the courtyard and looked down the narrow path I'd come from. Empty. The tall grass did not look disturbed. The whole place felt still. I turned back toward the stone slab. Another laugh. The same voice and same tone. This time it came from the right side, somewhere near the broken columns. A quick, breathy exhale, like someone amused but trying not to show it. There was still nothing there when I spun around. At this point, I was getting pretty anxious. There's this specific moment when your brain starts realizing that you're not dealing with a normal situation, and your body goes into this panic where everything is too loud and too quiet all at the same time. I backed away from the courtyard toward the path. Every few steps I kept turning, checking behind me, and then ahead and then behind again. Halfway down the path, I heard it again. But this time, it was above me. I stopped dead. It wasn't on the ruins. There was nothing tall enough nearby. It sounded like someone laughing directly over my head, maybe 10 or 12 feet up, like a person leaning out of a window or sitting on a ledge, but there was no window or ledge. I was standing in the wide open. I didn't look up. Something in me just refused. My body felt locked and my hands got cold. I just remember thinking compulsively, if I look up and see something, I'm done. If I look up and see nothing, I'm also done. The laugh faded slowly. It was like somebody walking away in the sky. I forced myself to move. I didn't run because running felt like the worst possible choice, but I walked fast enough that my breath turned into short, cold bursts. The path curved and the ruins blocked my view of the courtyard, which should have made me feel better, but actually made my skin crawl. I don't know why. It felt like turning your back on a predator. When I got close to the fence line, I heard something else. It wasn't the laugh. It was like a tired exhale, or more like something entertained. Like a satisfied sigh. Somebody who'd gotten exactly the reaction they wanted. I didn't look back. I climbed the fence badly, tore my shirt and scraped my leg, and jogged until I reached the road. The traffic noise never sounded so good. I didn't stop moving until I was at the bus stop, surrounded by real people, real lights, and real noise. I didn't sleep much that night or the next. A week later, in one of my classes, the professor was talking about Roman villas and how certain ruins have reputations even locals don't like to acknowledge. She mentioned Via dei Quintili as one of those places known for odd acoustics and strange occurrences, mostly whispers and disembodied laughter. I must have reacted, because after class she pulled me aside and said, "I can tell you've been there. Don't go there after dark." That's all she said, and honestly, that's all I needed. Well, the experience itself was all I needed, but that kind of put my final nail in the coffin. I never went back even in the daylight. It's easy to pretend something was just an acoustic trick, or nerves, or whatever. But that laugh that was right above me was not something my brain made up. It came from a direction that no person could have stood. I've had other weird experiences in between that and now, but nothing has ever gotten to me quite like that night in the ruins. The Haunted Cabin. I rented a secluded cabin near Lake Tahoe last winter after a brutal stretch of work and burnout. It was one of those listings advertised as perfect for solitude, which I realize now was a red flag disguised as a selling point. There were no neighbors, and cell service was pretty much non-existent. Just pines taller than buildings, and a lake that looked black once the sun dropped. The first 2 nights were pretty peaceful. Cold, but peaceful. I slept better than I had in months. No traffic or stupid notifications or noisy people. Just wind and trees. Night 3 was when the knocking started. It was around 1 in the morning. The sound was pretty soft at first. 3 knocks, slow and spaced apart. For a second, I thought it might be a woodpecker. I sat up and blinked into the darkness. The cabin had these big windows that faced the forest, but everything outside was pitch black. The nearest cabin was miles away. I didn't move, just tried to listen, and then it came again. 3 knocks in the same rhythm, from the same spot, the front door. I realized the knocking was too soft to be a woodpecker. Usually those things are louder than anything. They're very sharp knocks, but this was soft, like somebody was trying to be polite. I told myself all the stupid irrational things you tell yourself when you're trying to calm down. It was an animal, maybe a bear, maybe something brushed against the wood. But I knew in my heart that the knocks were too neat and intentional to be any of that. I got up and grabbed the flashlight and cracked the front door open. There was nothing out there, just trees and darkness and the faint hush of snow settling onto branches. The beam of my flashlight didn't catch eye shine or movement or anything. The porch was totally empty. I shut the door fast and locked it. The knocking did not come back that night, but the next night it did, this time at 12:47 a.m., which I remember because I checked the clock. It was the same precise 3 knocks. I tried to ignore it, pulled the covers over my head like a little kid, but it kept going every 10 minutes or so. Whatever it was patient and very persistent. At one point, I heard what sounded like knuckles dragging slowly down the wood. By morning, I was exhausted. The 3rd night, the knocking started earlier, 11:23 p.m. 3 knocks, and then a pause, and then 2 more closer together. I stood at the door for a long time, hand on the deadbolt. I don't know what I expected, but something in me needed to look. I opened the door in one quick motion. The forest stared back. My breath fogged in the freezing air. Snow glittered around the porch, but nothing moved. And that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The knocking hadn't come from the door. It sounded like it came through it, like someone standing exactly where I was now. I shut the door slowly. That night, I slept on the couch with the fireplace lit. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Soft ones, barely there, like someone walking slowly across old wood, testing the boards. And then the knocking started again. But this time it was at the window. 3 soft taps, right at the glass behind me. My whole body went cold. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I stared at the fireplace, while my pulse banged in my ears. I finally forced myself to turn around. But all I saw was my own reflection, faintly superimposed over the darkness outside. The window pane frosted slightly at the bottom. But the tapping continued. Now it wasn't on the glass. It was on the wall beside it. A slow, wandering tap, like knuckles moving over something textured. I grabbed my keys and left before the sun was up. I didn't necessarily pack, I just threw everything together and into my car. I didn't check out. I just drove until my phone finally got signal. When I called the rental owner, I didn't tell him all the details, just that something about the cabin didn't feel safe. He sighed, not in a way that would suggest he was mocking me or anything, but almost in a way that made it obvious I wasn't the first person to say that. About a week after returning home, the owner finally emailed me. In my rush, I had left some things behind, which of course I figured out after I got home. At that point, I figured they could keep it, but he did say the cleaning crew found all my stuff untouched, except for one thing. My jacket was folded neatly on the couch, and sitting on top of it, in the dead center, was a small pile of snow, right where my head had been the night the tapping reached the window. I don't know what it means, but I don't want that jacket back either way. The Vanishing Candle. So last summer, I stayed in this old villa that someone turned into a guest house, just outside Rome. It looked like something from a movie, with all these arched windows and ivy everywhere, and there was a fountain in the courtyard that never really worked. Every room had some old thing in it, which mostly meant the floors were weird and the doors didn't close right. But honestly, I thought it was cool. In my room, there was this little table with a brass candle holder, and it actually had a real candle in it, one you would use for light, not just for decoration. The host said some people used it for the vibe or whatever. I wasn't planning to light it, but then there was a storm and the power kept flickering, so I thought, why not? I lit the candle, read for a bit, then blew it out before bed. I even double-checked because the wind was making me nervous about starting a fire. I woke up sometime before sunrise. The candle was lit. It was just sitting there with this little steady flame, like it had been burning for ages. The wick was shorter, and there was a puddle of wax. The weird thing was, it didn't even smell like smoke or anything, so I figured it must have been going for a while. I sat up super fast. At first I thought maybe I just messed up and didn't blow it out right, but I knew I did. I literally watched it go out and checked twice because I was so paranoid about fire. So I blew it out again, really hard this time, and put the candle holder way over on the dresser across the room. I couldn't really fall asleep well after that, but I guess eventually I did. The next day, I walked around in the heat for ages, just looking at all the cool things. When I got back, I took a shower, got ready for bed, and checked the candle. Still on the dresser, wick was black, nothing weird. I didn't touch it. I kept the window cracked to let in some air and went to sleep. Then, after midnight or something, I woke up because I could see light even with my eyes closed. I opened my eyes, and yep, that stupid candle was lit again. But now, it was on the bedside table, and turned a totally different way than how I left it. I noticed the handle was turned like someone had actually carried it over and put it down on the nightstand. At this point, I started to feel a little freaked out. What if I had moved my hand in my sleep and knocked that over? I'm not saying something or someone was intentionally trying to harm me, but I didn't like that the candle had moved at all, and I really didn't like that it had moved so close to my bed. So this time I put it in the bathroom sink. I figured if somehow it lit itself again, at least it couldn't burn the place down. I closed the bathroom door, just in case, and got back in bed. Honestly, I think I just passed out from being tired. At like 4 a.m, I woke up again, and I swear that candle was back on the bedside table, lit. The bathroom door was still closed. The whole place was dead silent, which somehow made it even creepier. I didn't fall back asleep that night. At the risk of sounding insane, I figured I would tell the host there was something wrong with the candle. I tried to keep it vague. I mean, I couldn't exactly be like, "Hey, your ghosts keep lighting my candle." But when I brought it up, the lady acted like I had told her it was raining. She just said, "Well, I'm not surprised. It was her favorite room, after all." She barely even looked up when she said it. I asked who her was, and the lady just said, "Oh, the previous owner. She left a lot of her little habits behind. I wouldn't worry about it." I could tell she wasn't going to say anything else. But just to be safe, I took the candle out to the courtyard that day and put it way out on the edge of a stone planter. I figured if it wanted to light itself again, at least it wouldn't be right next to me. No idea why I thought that would actually work, but nope, because at 2 a.m, I woke up and that stupid candle was back on my bedside table, lit again. I didn't even bother blowing it out this time. I just lay in bed watching it, trying to figure out why the heck this ghost wanted to burn a candle so badly. At least it wasn't a wild, sputtering flame, I figured. I was still trying to figure out what was going on, and I guess I just fell back asleep, because the next thing I knew, I woke up again, and the candle was out. I only had one more day there, but thankfully not another night. I decided to put the candle, which was finally cold, in the cupboard. It wasn't even time to get up yet, but I told myself that if it showed up on my bedside table again, I was just going to leave. I put it in the cupboard, got back in bed, and somehow managed to fall asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to get the candle and put it back where it started out, but it was just gone. I looked everywhere, and I couldn't find it at all. I still have no idea what actually happened. But hey, at least now I have a story for when people ask me about the creepiest thing that's ever happened. The Opera House. I worked as a backup singer, more of a chorus filler really, at the Opera Garnier in Paris a few years ago. It wasn't glamorous, not like people imagine. Rehearsals were long, the hours unpredictable, and the place itself carried that kind of old, solemn energy that clung to every inch of marble and velvet. The first time I heard the piano, it was around 10 p.m., after most of the cast had gone home. A few of us were still backstage running lines. The crew was striking lights on stage, so only the secondary work lamps were on. Those cheap orange ones that throw out just enough light to see your hands and not much else. I was gathering my things when I heard a piano start playing in the distance, like someone warming up their hands before a piece. The sound came from the rehearsal room down the hallway, one we kept closed when not in use. At first, I figured the accompanist just stayed late, except the melody didn't sound like warm-up scales. It sounded like, I don't know, something intentional, but it wasn't any warm-up I'd ever heard, and it wasn't a song. The tune was old, something minor and offbeat, almost bell-like, but I couldn't place it. When I walked toward the sound, I started feeling a sudden cold draft that didn't match the summer heat outside. Everyone who's ever worked backstage knows that chill. It doesn't come from air conditioning, but from somewhere older. I opened the door quietly. The piano was playing by itself, and it wasn't a player piano. There was just a few scattered notes at first, hanging in the air. I froze in the doorway, trying to see if someone was crouched behind the lid, but the bench was empty, and the strangest part was the sound wasn't echoing right. The room swallowed it, muffled as if the walls absorbed rather than reflected it. After a few seconds, the music stopped. I walked in, half expecting to see one of the other singers waiting to jump out and freak me out, but nothing. I put my hand on the piano's surface, and it was ice cold. My palm felt a faint impression of condensation. I didn't say a word about it the next morning because it honestly sounded ridiculous, even to me. The opera house already had its share of ghost stories. The phantom stuff, the urban legends about the old catwalk worker who fell during a show in the 1920s, you name it. No one needed another tired, haunting tale. But the next week it happened again. This time I wasn't alone. One of the dancers, Julian, was putting away props when the sound started. The same distant piano, and the same odd melody. He turned to me and said, "Who's practicing that late?" I remember his voice going a little flat halfway through the question, like even he knew. We followed the sound together, and it came from the same direction, but stopped before we reached the room. Julian opened the door first. The piano was silent, but one of the keys, an E-flat, was pressed down slightly, as if someone had just lifted their finger off it. He didn't say anything, just gave me a look and then laughed it off. A nervous laugh. Over the next few weeks, everyone started noticing things. Stagehands talked about feeling someone brush past them when no one else was there. One woman swore she saw a reflection standing behind her in the dressing room mirror that vanished when she turned. Nothing overtly harmful, just persistently present. Then came the final rehearsal before opening night. The entire cast was in place. The orchestra pit was dark but occupied, the stage lights blinding. About halfway through, while we were holding position after a scene, I heard it again. That same melody weaving through the background noise. My mic was off, but I know I wasn't imagining it. I looked toward the orchestra, thinking maybe a pianist accidentally hit a few wrong notes between sets. But every musician was frozen still, waiting for the conductor's signal. The sound came from above, echoing faintly from the upper rehearsal balcony. The conductor stopped, angry at the disruption. The sound faded before anyone could investigate. After rehearsal, I went up there alone. I know, bad decision, but curiosity wins over fear for me every time. The balcony rehearsal room was empty. Dust floated through the stage light, filtering from a half-open curtain. I went straight to the piano. It was the same one from before. Its surface looked clean except for a thin streak across the lid, like a hand had been dragged across the dust. When I touched the keys, though, they were warm this time, faintly vibrating as if they'd just been played. And that's what unsettled me most, the warmth. On my way down the stairs, I thought I heard footsteps following behind me, tapping faintly in rhythm with the distant hum of the lights. When I turned, it stopped. A few months later, I left the opera to join a smaller company. I never told anyone officially what I'd experienced there. But sometimes when I'm on stage now, especially during late rehearsals when the hall goes quiet, I feel like I can almost hear it again. Someone told me once that the Opéra Garnier keeps an unused sub-basement room sealed off below the stage, where an old rehearsal piano was stored decades ago after a musician collapsed during a performance. Nobody ever opened it again because the staff said that it started playing after hours. I didn't believe that story then. Now, I'm not so sure. The shadow in the window. I was in Rome, staying in this older hotel near Via Giulia. Not one of the fancy places. More like historic, but not intentionally. Uneven tile floors and doors that don't quite latch. A lobby that smells vaguely like lemon cleaner and old marble. That kind of place. The building was tall and narrow, maybe 5 stories. My room was on the 4th, facing a tiny side street that barely got any foot traffic after dark. Honestly, it should have been the quietest room in the place. And for a couple of nights, it was. Then came the shadow. It started on a Tuesday. I'd gotten back late after dinner with a coworker, and I was just laying in bed scrolling through photos that I had taken. The statue of Marcus Aurelius, some random alley cat, a very bad attempt at gelato holding selfies. The bedside lamp was on, dim and warm, barely enough to read by. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something move on the far wall. It was a flicker, like when someone walks past a window outside and momentarily blocks the streetlight. Except there were no people walking outside, and my window looked directly onto a dead-end lane that was empty except for a parked scooter. I glanced over at the window. Nothing. The curtain was half pulled, swaying just a little from the draft that the old frame let in. There was nothing outside but the pale glow of a distant lamp and the faint outline of shuttered windows across the way. I convinced myself it was just headlights reflecting strangely. I closed the curtain fully and went to sleep. But the next night, the same thing happened. A shadow slid across the wall, long and tall, like the silhouette of someone walking past the window. I went to the window again. Everything was completely empty and still. I pushed the curtain aside and actually leaned out just a little bit. Cold air hit my face. There was no one out there. No lights moved, no shifting shapes, just the old stone walls and the dull gold of the street lamp, like always. I stepped back, and the shadow moved again. This time it crossed slowly, like whatever it was had stopped walking and just stood near the window, shifting its weight. The shape was kind of hard to describe. Humanoid, maybe, but blurry. Kind of like somebody standing behind frosted glass, even though the curtain was open and the window was unobstructed. I wasn't thrilled. One thing about travel, you kind of learn to ignore a lot of weirdness. People yelling in the street, plumbing sounds that resemble death cries, the occasional questionable stains in stairwells. But shadows that move on walls without a source? That one's a little bit harder to brush off. I checked behind the furniture. I checked the hallway. I even turned off the lamp to see if something in the room was casting it. The shadow kept moving. Not uniformly either. It paced back and forth. Like someone wandering just outside the window. Every time it crossed, it stretched a little too long. Like the proportions weren't quite right. After about 15 minutes of silently spiraling, I decided to go downstairs and ask the night clerk if there was any chance someone could be outside the window. A maintenance worker or late guest smoking, whatever. The clerk on duty was tired, uninterested, a man who looked like he'd been working nights for 20 years. I asked if anyone ever went on to the little back street when they shouldn't. He shook his head immediately. "That street is private," he said. Only deliveries in the morning. No one's there at night. Could someone stand outside the windows, like between the buildings? He frowned, like I had asked if guests often sleep on the roof. No, there is nowhere to stand. The wall goes straight down. Straight down. When I went back upstairs, I looked again. Yeah, he was right. From my window, straight down was nothing but a vertical drop, maybe 20 or 30 feet, to the cobblestone street below. There was no ledge or balcony or little nook where a person could stand. Whatever was making that shadow was not standing outside my window. Back in the room, the shadow was gone. The wall was just a wall. I turned on every light that I could find and watched TV until sunrise, and convinced myself exhaustion had played tricks on me. Travel fatigue is real. Shadows can be deceptive. Old buildings can draft around and make curtains move strangely. That's what I told myself, and it worked. For one night. The next evening, I returned around 11 after wandering Trastevere and feeling pleasantly tired and full of pasta. I wasn't really thinking about the shadow anymore. But when I entered the room, I felt something wrong immediately. The curtains were drawn. I hadn't left them that way. I figured it was housekeeping maybe and pulled them open slowly. The window pane reflected the room behind me. And in the reflection behind me, something passed by. A shadow taller than me by a head. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. Of course, I saw nothing. I checked the closet, the bathroom, behind the armchair, anywhere a person could theoretically hide in a tiny hotel room. But there was no one. But the second I stopped moving, I heard something. A soft scrape, like a fingertip brushing across glass. I froze and turned toward the window. Another scrape. Slow. Higher this time, like something dragging its hand, or whatever it had, across the outside of the glass. There shouldn't have been anything there. I was 4 stories up, facing a narrow street with no access. But the sound continued, faint and rhythmic, drawn-out strokes across the window. I grabbed the curtain and threw it open, but of course nothing was there. But on the wall behind me, the shadow moved again. This time it lingered, like it had stopped right behind me and was leaning in. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I asked to switch rooms. The woman at the desk gave me a polite but confused look and asked if something was wrong with the plumbing or the noise. I lied and said the radiator wouldn't stop clicking. She moved me to a room on the 2nd floor, facing the main street. Lots of traffic, no dead-end alley, no way for anything to lurk outside the windows discreetly. That night I slept better, until I woke up at about 2 o'clock in the morning with a strange feeling, like someone had walked past my bed. I forced myself to stay still, breathing slowly. The room was dim. On the far wall, just above the desk, a shadow passed. No one outside could have cast it. The angle was wrong and the silhouette didn't match anything in the room. I watched it glide across the wall and then back again, like it had found me. Even in a new room, even on a different floor. It paused near the window, just stayed there like it was waiting for me to get up and look. I didn't. Not that night, and not the next night either. On the final night, I checked out early, way before dawn, and rolled my suitcase down the empty street, and I didn't look back. I got an overpriced room near the airport just to feel like I was somewhere too modern and too exposed and too busy for shadows to follow. Back home, a few weeks later, I was on a call with a coworker who'd stayed at the same hotel the year before. He asked how I liked it. I hesitated and then asked if he'd ever had anything weird happen there. He waited a beat, and then he said, "Did you see it in the window too?" I didn't even ask what he meant, because I already knew. The Guest in the Third Row by Leo G. I'm currently sitting in a small pensione in Siena, and I've spent the last 6 hours trying to convince myself I didn't actually see what I think I saw. I flew out here for my cousin's wedding. It was supposed to be a dream ceremony, a 12th century stone chapel tucked away in the hills of Tuscany, surrounded by olive groves and those tall, thin cypress trees that look like dark flames against the sky. The chapel, San Galgano, was beautiful but ancient. It had that heavy, damp smell of old limestone and incense that's been settled into the floorboards for 800 years or so. The ceremony started around 4 p.m. I was sitting in the third row, on the aisle, trying to stay focused on the priest's Italian, while the sun streamed through the high, narrow windows and dusty shafts. Everything was going perfectly, until the exchange of vows. The chapel was dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble. My cousin, Maria, was just beginning to speak when I heard a sound from the very back of the church. It was the sound of a camera shutter. It sounded like click whir. I didn't think much of it. We had a professional photographer floating around, so it made sense. But then the sound happened again, and this time it was right behind my left ear. I turned my head slightly, thinking the photographer had snuck up behind me. There was a woman sitting at the end of the row directly behind mine. I hadn't noticed her before. She was wearing a dress the exact shade of the stone walls, a dull, textured gray. She had a fascinator on her head, but the lace veil was pulled all the way down over her chin. She wasn't holding a camera. Her hands were folded in her lap. They were pale, almost translucent looking, and the fingers were twice as long as they should have been. As I watched, she leaned forward. She didn't move her neck. Her entire torso tilted like it was on a hinge. She opened her mouth, or where her mouth should have been under the lace, and out came the sound of the camera shutter again. Click whir. It wasn't a vocal imitation. It was a high-fidelity mechanical playback of an SLR shutter. A digital one. It had the exact metallic clink of the mirror flipping up. I looked back at the altar. No one else seemed to notice. Maria was still speaking, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I turned back to the woman in gray, but she wasn't there anymore. The seat was empty. The guest sitting next to where she'd been, an uncle from Milan, was staring straight ahead, totally oblivious. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. I tried to focus on the ceremony, but then the glitch started to affect the priest. He was mid-sentence when his voice suddenly looped. Per tutta la vita, per tutta la vita, per tutta la vita. He repeated the phrase 6 times in rapid succession. His mouth wasn't moving in sync with the words anymore. His jaw was hanging open, and the sound was coming from the stone pulpit itself. It sounded like a corrupted audio file. The guests started to shift in their seats, whispering. But then the priest snapped back into motion, continuing the prayer as if nothing had happened. I looked toward the side of the chapel, near the baptismal font. The woman in gray was there. She was standing now. She was taller than she had been a minute ago, at least 7 feet. Her gray dress didn't have any seams. It looked like the fabric was actually part of her skin, like textured, as though the rough-hewn limestone of the church was her dress and her skin. She turned her head toward me. The lace veil didn't move, but behind it, I saw a flash of something. It wasn't eyes. It was a reflection of the altar, but the image was inverted. I could see Maria and the groom standing upside down inside the eyes of this thing. She raised one of those long, spindly hands and pointed it at the wedding cake sitting on a table near the entrance. Suddenly, the cake began to stutter. The white frosting started to flicker between white and a bright neon magenta. It looked like a texture error in a video game. 1 second the cake was 3 tiers of vanilla bean. The next, it was a jagged, blocky mass of purple light. Then the sound returned, but it wasn't a camera. It was Maria's voice. "I, Maria, take you," the voice said from the back of the room. It played the first 5 words of her vow, over and over, getting louder each time. The pitch started to shift, dropping lower and lower, until it sounded like a recording being played at half speed. The woman in gray started to lag toward the altar. She didn't walk. She would vanish and reappear 3 feet closer every second. Pop, pop, pop. Each jump made a sound like a speaker blowing out. I stood up, ready to shout, to stop the wedding, to do anything. But when I tried to speak, my own voice was gone. I opened my mouth and all that came out was the sound of the camera shutter. Click, whir. I looked at my hands. My skin was turning gray. The texture of my suit jacket was starting to blur, the navy blue wool merging into my wrists. I looked at the guest next to me. He was frozen. Everyone was frozen. The priest, the bride, the groom, they were all stuck in a single frame of motion, like a paused movie. The only thing moving was the woman in gray. She reached the altar and stood behind Maria. She reached out and touched Maria's shoulder. The second her fingers made contact, the world reloaded, for lack of a better word. The lights in the chapel surged. I felt a jolt, like an electric shock, and suddenly I was sitting back in the 3rd row. The priest was finishing the blessing. Maria and the groom were kissing. The guests were clapping. It was 4:45 p.m. I looked behind me. The seat was empty. I looked at the baptismal font. Nothing but shadows. My voice was back, and my suit was just wool again. I walked out of that church as fast as I could without running. At the reception afterward, I found the photographer. I asked to see the shots from the ceremony. I just told him I wanted to see how the lighting looked. He scrolled through the digital previews on his screen. Every single photo from the exchange of vows was corrupted. They were filled with digital noise, jagged lines of gray and purple, and weird, blocky artifacts that obscured the bride and groom. In the very last photo of the ceremony, right as they kissed, there is a figure in the background. It's a tall gray shape standing behind Maria. It doesn't have a face, but it's wearing a lace veil. And if you look closely at the eyes behind the lace, you can see a reflection. It's a reflection of me, sitting in the 3rd row, looking directly into the camera. I'm leaving Italy tomorrow. I didn't go to the farewell brunch. I don't want to see Maria. I don't want to hear her voice, because every time she speaks, I can still hear that faint, mechanical click whir underneath her words. I don't think the guest left the church. I think it found a way to save itself into the family, like some kind of virus in a file. and I'm terrified that the next time I see a family photo, the person standing next to me won't be a cousin at all. The empty gift. The Christmas I turned 9 was the year I started noticing things other people didn't. My mother liked to say I had an overactive imagination, which was her gentle way of telling me to stop asking questions she didn't want to answer. My father, practical to his bones, said that ghosts were for stories and the telly, and that was the end of that. But that winter felt different from the start. Snow had fallen early that year, thick and heavy, muffling our neighborhood until even footsteps sounded distant. Our house sat at the end of a quiet street, a simple 2-story place with drafty windows, low ceilings, and a roof that groaned under the weight of each new snowfall. My parents loved it. I didn't mind it, but sometimes at night, I swore I heard someone walking in the hallway upstairs when everyone else was asleep. Christmas Eve was warm inside, lights glowing softly on the tree, tinsel catching the flicker of the fireplace. My mother wrapped presents while humming tunelessly, my father pretending not to eat the sugar cookies cooling on the counter. We drank cocoa, watched an old movie, and tried to pretend we weren't all exhausted from the year we had just had. By 10 o'clock, my parents had gone to bed. I was meant to be sleeping too, but the house felt unusually still, the way outside does right before a storm. I lay awake listening to the tick of the hallway clock and the faint creaks of the settling walls. And then I heard a soft rustle from downstairs. It wasn't furniture shifting or the heat kicking on. It was more like paper, wrapping paper. Curiosity beat caution, as it often does when you're 9. I slipped out of bed, tiptoed across the cold floorboards, and crept to the staircase. The garland along the banister glowed green in the dark, and each step groaned under my weight as though the house were listening. The living room was dim, lit only by the tree and the faint orange wash from the dying fire. At first glance, nothing looked different. The presents sat where they had been earlier, neatly arranged, familiar shapes under bright paper and ribbon. But one box hadn't been there before. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, and wrapped in thick cream-colored paper, with a satin bow tied carefully around it. There were no creases or fingerprints or any sign that anyone hurried through the job. A tag hung from the ribbon. It said, "For the one who sees." I stared at it, breath caught somewhere between excitement and fear. It wasn't from my parents. They wrote in quick loops and slanted lines. This was printed in old-fashioned handwriting. Elegant strokes, the kind you only see in antique books. I knelt beside the tree. The present felt heavier than it looked. Cold, too, as if it had been left outside for hours before being carried in. For a long moment, I debated waking my parents, but something held me still. I tugged the ribbon loose. The paper fell away in clean, perfect folds, revealing a plain, faded cardboard box. It looked older than the house itself. Dust lingered in the creases. My fingers trembled a little as I lifted the lid. Inside was a photograph. Black and white, matte texture, the kind you'd find in an attic trunk or a box of old family matters no one talks about. It showed our house, exactly as it looked now, right down to the sagging gutter and the chipped paint along the front porch. Except the trees were shorter, the sidewalk was missing, and there was no snow on the ground. It must have been taken decades ago. At first, I thought that was all, but then I looked closer. In the upstairs window, the second window on the right, my bedroom, something pale stood behind the glass. Not quite a face, but not quite a silhouette either. More like an impression of a person, a suggestion of shoulders, a blurred outline of a head tilted slightly, watching something just outside the frame. Watching me, I realized, with a chill. My heart hammered, the room felt colder. The fireplace crackled, but it didn't warm me. I turned the photo over. The back was blank. I looked again at the window in the picture. The pale figure was still there. I snapped the lid back onto the box and rushed upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. My breath came out in short puffs. The house felt wrong now. Too wide, too empty. Every shadow stretched longer than it should have been. I burst into my room, flicked on the light, and stared at the window. Nothing. Just my own reflection and the thick, drifting snow outside. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the photograph under my pillow, box and all, because leaving it anywhere else felt dangerous for reasons I couldn't explain. When morning came, I carried it straight to the kitchen, where my parents were already at the table with coffee steaming between them. "Look," I said, placing the box on the table. My mother raised an eyebrow. "Where did you find that?" "Under the tree. It wasn't from you, right?" My father frowned. "No, we didn't put that there." "Just look," I insisted. I pulled the photograph out and handed it to them carefully, like it was evidence. They both leaned in. Then my mother gave a half laugh, the kind adults use when they're trying not to show worry. "Well, it's blank, sweetheart." "It's not blank," I said, louder than I meant to. "Look again." My father turned it over, squinting. "Nothing on either side." He passed it back. "Maybe you dreamed the rest." I clenched the photo so tightly it bent slightly. But when I looked down, it was blank. There was no house or window. There was no pale figure. It was just an empty, slightly yellowed rectangle of old photo paper. "But it was there," I whispered. My parents exchanged a look. One of those quiet, condescending parental glances that carries a dozen private conversations between it. My mother reached out and squeezed my arm gently. "You probably saw an old shadow in the firelight," she said softly. "Christmas Eve plays tricks with tired eyes." I wanted to argue, but something in the room changed then. A shift in the air. A faint draft across my neck. The sense of someone standing just behind my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. But for a split second, just before I fully faced the hallway, I thought I saw something reflected in the microwave door across the room. Something pale, standing at the top of the stairs, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart thudded once, hard enough to shake something loose inside me. I didn't show them the box again. I didn't ask who left it or why. I tucked it away in the back of my closet where the shadows felt familiar and the house felt less likely to notice it. Years have passed since then, and I haven't seen another photograph. Not like that. Not in a gift or from something that knew exactly what window to stand in. But every Christmas, just before dawn, I find a faint imprint in the snow beneath my bedroom window. It's not quite a footprint. It's more like a single pale shape pressed into the drift, as if something was standing there, waiting for the one who sees. The Light in the Window by Daniel M. This happened in 2019, my first time traveling alone. Booked 5 nights in a cheap hotel near Piazza Barberini in Rome. The kind of place that sits wedged between better buildings, narrow hallways, lumpy bed, windows that almost reach another wall. I planned for quiet evenings, eat late, come back to the hotel, write postcards or scroll until I fell asleep. That first night, as I sat at the desk by the window, I noticed a light flickering across the narrow alley in the adjacent building. The building was older, shutters broken, marble chipped, vines dry and crusted against the wall. From what the receptionist said, it had been empty for years, still owned by some family fighting inheritance paperwork. But in one window on the second floor, directly across from mine, a dim yellow light pulsed. Not like a bulb going bad, more like a candlelight moving behind glass. At first, I thought maybe a squatter or groundskeeper still used the place, but something about the position of the window didn't add up. The glow came from deeper inside the room's layout, deeper than it seemed to allow, and each time it dimmed, I half expected to see motion, the silhouette of someone crossing maybe, only there never was. Night 2, same time, the light came on again. I found myself waiting for it after dinner like it was part of the itinerary. The flame wobbled slowly, close enough to catch shadows on the cracked plaster around it. I sat watching for almost 20 minutes, long after I meant to be asleep. It began to feel like something purposeful, the exact timing, the way the rhythm slowed and then stopped. At 1:13 a.m., the light blinked out completely. The next morning, walking past the alley, I looked at that same window from below. It was sealed with old boards nailed horizontally behind the shutters, which were warped but not fully open. No way for a candle to be set there, unless someone had unbarred it from inside. Still, night 3, the glow appeared again, brighter this time. Yellow edging white, flickering whiter across the glass. The air in my room felt colder when it came on. I told myself it could be reflection from streetlights or passing cars, though none reached that high. Still, a part of me was aware how I'd started sitting down at the desk earlier each evening, waiting subconsciously. Around midnight, as I watched, the flickering grew strangely steady, like the light was fixing itself into clarity. A faint shape formed in the frame, long and vertical, almost like a figure standing partly behind the drapes. I blinked hard, leaned forward, but the edges dissolved. I told myself my eyes were dry. When it cut out again at 1:13, I went to bed jittery, half laughing at myself. But before I drifted off, a subtle smell reached me. Burnt wax and dust. By morning, the smell was gone, but I couldn't shake it. That evening, on a whim, I asked the man at the front desk if the building across was ever occupied. He hesitated, smiling the way people do when they're deciding how much truth to share. "No," he said. "Old palazzo, no power. Nobody lives there." "So, no lights?" I pressed. He shrugged, looked past me into the doorway and then back. "In old cities, sometimes light moves on its own. Don't look too long." He grinned when he said it, but it didn't sound like a joke. Night 4, my curiosity curdled into obsession. I turned off all the lamps in my room and pulled up a chair directly at the window, curtains angled just enough that I could stare across unseen. The moment the clock struck 12, the light flashed again. Same window, same color, pulsing faintly. I counted. In intervals of 6 seconds, the glow brightened, dimmed, then swelled longer, like breathing. Then it steadied completely. Something, or someone, moved behind it. A ripple crossed through the curtain on that side, followed by a darker outline cast over the flickering glow. The shape was heighted, human, facing my direction. Every instinct told me to step back, but I sat dead still. There was a stretch where we just existed across that narrow void. Me behind my glass, it behind its own, the two panes mirroring each other. Then the light behind it began trembling faster, erratically, though the silhouette didn't move at all. At 1:13, right on schedule, it extinguished, like someone cupped their hand over a candle. Darkness flooded the alley. When I finally turned around to walk toward the bed, I noticed movement in the reflection of my window. Something faintly luminous seemed to shift just behind the glass, like a trick of my own lamp, except my lamp was off. By the time I looked back, it was gone. I slept maybe 2 hours that night, nerves humming. The fifth evening, before I left for dinner, I tried to take a picture of the opposite building through daylight. My phone camera struggled to focus on the dark window. It kept rendering glare or lens flare exactly where the reflection of that glow would be. 3 photos, all useless. When I returned late, the light was already glowing early, before midnight. The first time it hadn't waited for me to notice. Half an hour later, the temperature in my room sank. Not like a draft, but a tangible drop, like a fridge compressor kicking on. I stood and touched the glass. It was warm on my fingertips, faintly vibrating. I don't know why, but I whispered, "Who are you?" Almost on cue, the opposite glow dimmed to nothing. My entire room stayed smothered in stillness for a full minute. Then, out of nowhere, the desk lamp beside me flicked on by itself, shorted, and died. The smoke smell returned, hot metal mixed with wax. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I had convinced myself to check out early and move hotels. The receptionist looked sympathetic, like he'd seen that reaction before. When I handed back the key, I mentioned the light again, laughing nervously. He didn't return the smile. He said quietly, "Then it saw you too." Outside, the fog had lifted, the usual Roman gold light returning everything to ordinary. I walked down toward Via Veneto, thinking I'd already half forgotten it. But when I stopped at the crosswalk, something made me glance back. The window across the alley was open, completely now, both shutters folded back, hitting the walls. Inside was only black shadow and part of a desk visible through clutter. Balanced there was a single white candle, unlit. I left Rome that afternoon. Every hotel since, I check the view the moment I arrive, especially if there's an old building next door. Most nights there's nothing, except the standard spill of streetlight on plaster. But once, a few months later, while I was staying in Marseille, I woke up at about 1:13 a.m. to faint light pushing through my curtain. It was soft, flickering, rhythm steady as breath, like it had somehow closed the distance between us. The Darkened Church by Father Antonio B. So I've been a priest for over 20 years, mostly in small places outside Rome. 2 years ago, they moved me to this old church in the city. It's not a tourist spot or anything, just an old stone building in some narrow streets. It looks pretty worn out. Right from the first week, I could tell something was weird about the place. The church had a stillness that went beyond quiet. The air stayed cold, even in July, carrying this faint, sour odor like damp stone. Sometimes when I walked through the nave, I felt as though someone matched my pace a few steps behind, soft leather on stone. But when I turned, only the candlelight moved. The first weird thing happened during evening prayer. I was by myself. I lit 6 candles and started praying. Halfway through, one candle went out, and then another. I thought maybe there was a draft, but all the windows were closed. I lit them again, but then they all went out at once. For a second, it smelled like burnt hair. I stopped praying. I know sometimes you can see weird things if you're tired or hungry, but that didn't explain what happened next. The altar table actually moved a little, scraping on the floor, and then it was quiet again. I didn't tell anyone about it. I guess I was kind of scared they'd think I was making it up, and I didn't really want to talk about it. But that quiet didn't last long. About a week later, I went downstairs at midnight because I heard the front doors rattling. I thought maybe somebody was trying to get in. The locks are really heavy, but the doors were shaking like there was a storm, except there wasn't any storm. When I got closer, the doors stopped moving. All the candles went out except one. The whole church was dark except for that one candle. It was really quiet, even outside. And then I heard breathing from the front pews. It was slow and really loud. In Italian, I called out, "Who's there?" But all I heard was the tail end of my own echo. The breathing stopped. And then I heard a low voice say my name, really calm and close. Antonio. It came from the confessional. It's weird what you notice in moments like that. The wood creaked when I walked up. I smelled incense, but we hadn't used any that day. My heart was beating really loud. I opened the confessional and it was empty on both sides. The curtain wasn't moving. But when I stepped inside, the door shut by itself, and the latch clicked. I tried to open the door again, and then I heard a whisper through the grill. It was really quiet, and I couldn't tell who it was, but it said, "You cannot pray." And then it got really dark inside, way darker than normal. I could see my hands for a second, and then nothing. The air felt tight, and for a moment, it felt like somebody breathed right next to my ear. I managed to open the latch and I got out. All the candles in the church were lit again, and they even looked brighter than before. The next day, I asked one of the oldest people in the church, Signora Lazzari, if she ever heard about weird stuff happening there. She looked surprised and then crossed herself. She said when she was a kid, her dad worked there and used to say that the confessional was restless because a priest died in it during confession. He had had a heart attack while hearing a man admit to killing someone. They never found the body of the person the guy said he killed. I'm not sure if I believe her. There are a lot of stories about old churches in Rome, but something about that confessional still feels off. Now, every night before I lock up, I check that booth last, and I stay away from it. Sometimes when I walk past, I hear the door creak open a little, like the place is trying to say something. But I'm never down there after midnight. Not anymore. Footsteps in the hall. So I had to go to London for work last winter, and my company is super cheap, so I ended up in this small B&B. I don't really sleep much anyway because of my weird hours, so I thought, whatever, it's just a few nights. The place was this old, narrow house with high ceilings and thin walls, and the carpets looked like they'd been there forever, probably older than the pipes. The owner was this older guy called Peter. He seemed nice, but he talked in this quiet way like he was about to say something important, and then just didn't. He said I was the only guest that week, which honestly made sense because it was cold and the place wasn't exactly fancy. Even with the radiators on, it felt kind of chilly. He took me up to my room on the second floor and called it the Blue Room. It was small and kind of cozy, nothing special. Just a bed, a dresser, a little desk, and a window looking out at the snowy street. The hallway was really narrow and had this old red carpet that made everything super quiet. The first night was totally normal. The street was quiet, the house was quiet, just the usual London stuff like buses in the distance and someone yelling outside late at night. I actually slept fine. The second night was when it all started. I'd just gotten into bed and turned off the lamp when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow ones, heel to toe with that weighty sound of somebody who really isn't bothering to be quiet. They started at the far end of the hall, near the stairs, and came toward my door. I figured maybe Peter was checking something, like the radiators, or maybe there was a leak or something. The house was old enough that I just thought stuff probably needed fixing all the time. But the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I waited for a knock, but I never heard one. After about 10 seconds of silence, I got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. I just stood there, barefoot on the cold floor, trying to hear if anyone was moving around. I couldn't hear any doors closing or creaks or anything, other than the house making old building noises. I closed the door kind of quietly and felt a bit dumb for freaking out. But I had heard footsteps coming up to the door, but I never heard any leave. I tried to shake it off. The second time, I wasn't half asleep. I got back late from work, like 1:30 in the morning, and was just sitting at the desk eating some leftover takeout. The hallway was super quiet. The whole place felt empty, like everyone else had just left. Even the people who worked there, which was really only 1 or 2 people. Then the footsteps started again. Same slow rhythm, same direction, same everything. They stopped outside my door again. This time, I opened the door immediately with no hesitation. Empty hallway. Dim wall sconce buzzing faintly, but nothing else. I checked the bathroom down the hall, looked over the banister at the stairs, and even tried to listen for someone breathing, but I never heard anything. I don't even know what I thought I'd find, just someone. When I asked Peter about it the next morning, he gave me a polite smile and said, "Old houses make odd noises. Carpets loosen, boards shift, pipes knock, you know." But footsteps? That's not really a pipe noise. Still, I just went along with it because I didn't want to be that guest. That night, it escalated. I woke up at like 4 in the morning. It wasn't even the footsteps that woke me up, I don't think. It was just this weird feeling like someone was standing right outside my door. And then the footsteps started, but not at the end of the hall. They started right outside my door and just went back and forth. Slow, but also a little restless. Like 3 or 4 one way, stop, and then back the other way, and stop again. Pacing back and forth outside my door. I just laid there and stared at the ceiling. My heart was pounding, and I was just trying to tell myself it was probably Peter. Maybe he couldn't sleep, or he was checking on something, I don't know. The footsteps kept going for a while, long enough that I just couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed really slowly, trying not to make a sound. I made it to the door and put my ear up to it. The footsteps were right there, like just a few inches away, clear and heavy and definitely a person. I could almost picture somebody pacing there. I yanked the door open. There was nothing. There was no one in the hall, no one turning any corners, no doors closing, just nothing. The air felt cold. I just stood there for a while, honestly more annoyed than scared at this point because I was just so tired. The next night was my last one there. I almost left early, but I had a meeting in the morning and I didn't want to drag my stuff all over the city. Around midnight, I heard those stupid footsteps again. This time though, they didn't start at one end. They just kind of showed up out of nowhere, like someone just appeared in the middle of the hall. They went past my door, down the hall, and stopped at the end. And then they came back. I opened the door just a little bit this time and stayed behind it. The hallway looked totally normal with the dim lights and it was super quiet. But the footsteps kept coming, steady and right up to my door. As soon as they got to my door, I felt the air push past me, like someone had just walked right through the crack. It wasn't a breeze or a draft. It was like an actual push. I slammed the door and locked it, even though I knew a lock wouldn't stop anything. I slept with the lights on that night. When I checked out in the morning, Peter gave me the same polite smile. "Everything to your liking?" I almost said no, but something in the way he stood, with his hands clasped behind his back, slightly tired eyes, made me keep it to myself, like he'd heard people ask 100 times and just didn't want to talk about it anymore. So I just nodded, gave him the key, and left. The Vanishing Bride by Anonymous. Last fall, I went to Venice for work. I spent my days in meetings and tried to explore the city at night. My hotel near Cannaregio was tiny, with narrow hallways, low ceilings, and a faint water smell. I didn't mind. Venice is strange, almost like it wants you to feel a little lost. The night this happened, my coworkers and I had a long dinner. Everyone pretended not to be tired, but it was obvious we all were. I was the only one who wanted to walk back instead of taking a water taxi, so I took some quiet alleys to reach the canal path to my hotel. It was close to midnight, fog rolling in from the water. Every sound felt both closer and farther away. Venice at night is almost too quiet for a city. No cars, barely any voices, just water slapping stone, and the occasional clank of a boat rope against a pole. Halfway across one of the narrow bridges, I saw her. A woman in a white dress stood by the canal not far ahead. At first, I thought she was a local, out late, or maybe a tourist taking photos. Venice has plenty of both. Her dress looked old, like something from a wedding or an old movie. It was long-sleeved and not modern at all. She wasn't posing or holding a phone. She just stood there, staring at the water. I slowed down without thinking. Something about how she stood bothered me. She was very still, not like somebody enjoying the view, but like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. As I got closer, she turned her head slightly, but not far enough for me to see her face. I was about to ask if she was okay, but she turned away before I could speak. She didn't run or even hurry. She walked down the canal path, slow and steady, her white dress trailing behind her, and catching the faint light from the street lamps. I followed her, not because I'm stupid or anything, but because something seemed weird. It was late, the fog was thick, and there was no railing by the canal. She moved in this strange way, kind of drifting, like she wasn't really paying attention, and I was a little bit worried. I kept enough distance. I stayed far enough back so I wouldn't seem weird, but the more I watched her, the stranger it felt. She just didn't move like a normal person. Her dress didn't even make a sound. The fog looked thicker around her, almost like she was bringing it with her. For a moment, she disappeared behind a stone wall, and when I rounded the corner, she was gone. Completely gone. The path ahead was straight. There were no side alleys, no boats close enough for someone to get on. Just the canal on one side and a building on the other. I even walked ahead a bit in case she just moved fast, but there was nobody. The only thing I heard was the water. The only thing I saw was the fog curling along the ground. I stayed there longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it. Maybe she slipped into a doorway I missed, or maybe a gate I hadn't noticed was open. But the building wall was smooth, with no entrances for at least 20 meters. I walked back the way I came, kind of looking at the water every few steps. My chest felt tight, like I messed with something that I shouldn't have. Venice is like that sometimes, like it's too old and you're just walking through whatever is left. When I got back to my hotel, I asked the night clerk if there were any events with old clothes or weddings that night. He just shook his head and said, "No weddings today," and kind of waved me off. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that woman in white standing by the canal. Her head turned a little, as if she knew I was there, as if she were waiting for somebody to notice her. Before I left, I walked the same way again, but during the day. There was no fog, of course, and no weird quiet, just tourists and boats and people talking. The path looked normal, like nothing had ever happened there. But I kept glancing out of the corner of my eye, half expecting to see her again, though I'm not really sure why. A few nights after I got home, I woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. Not sure why. My room was dark, and nothing seemed unusual. But when I looked toward the window, I swear I saw a white blur move past the edge of the glass, soft and drifting, just like the woman had walked across the canal. I got up fast, heart beating, and looked outside, but there was nothing there. I haven't seen anything like that since, and sometimes I get a weird feeling that I had on the bridge, like someone is standing just out of sight, waiting for me to look. I'm sure it's not her. I'm sure that I'm just jumpy because of what happened, or I don't know. But I don't even wear white anymore, and I don't really know how to explain that. It just feels rude or disrespectful, like I shouldn't. I'm not really sure how to explain everything. There's no tidy ending here. I didn't find out about some woman who drowned and walks the canal. But it definitely stuck with me. And whatever it was an experience that I'll remember forever. The Eerie Piano. I spent a week in Vienna last October, staying in one of those old-world hotels near the Ringstrasse. Ornate carpets, oil paintings, gold-trimmed sconces, and hallways that echo a little too well. Vienna is a city that breathes music, so I didn't think twice when I booked a place that advertised a historic grand piano in the lobby. It seemed fitting for a city built on waltzes and symphonies that birthed Mozart. The first 2 nights were quiet. My room overlooked a courtyard, and even though the hotel was older than most countries, it felt sturdy. Then, on the 3rd night, sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound of a piano. At first it was soft, barely audible over the hum of the radiator. Just a few notes. I didn't recognize the song. It wasn't anything classical. It was just kind of like the musical equivalent of doodling. I lay there, listening, fully awake. For a while, I just listened to it because it kind of sounded nice. I don't think it was necessarily a song per se, but it was a little bit like listening to wind chimes. But after a while, I started to wonder who would be up at this time of night playing the piano. I mean, surely there were rules. There were a bunch of people staying in the hotel, so kind of rude to be downstairs playing. Anyway, I grabbed a sweater and stepped out into the hallway. And didn't really hear anything. But then, as soon as my door closed behind me, I heard it again down the hall. I followed it all the way down to, of course, the grand piano, which sat in the corner under a chandelier. There was sheet music neatly arranged. The lid was closed, and there was a velvet rope blocking the bench. But the melody was playing anyway. At this point, it was pretty clear that whatever this was, it wasn't actually coming from the piano. So I thought, well, maybe there's a radio or stereo somewhere. Maybe it's like ambiance, I don't know. As I was standing there, kind of entranced and kind of freaked out, I was just staring at this piano, trying to figure out where in the world the music was coming from. After a while, a night manager appeared from behind the front desk. I kind of jumped because I didn't know anybody was there, and I think I startled him too. "Sir, is everything all right?" he asked. I gestured toward the piano. "Who's playing?" He kind of blinked. No one, sir." "You don't hear that?" He paused and looked like he was really trying to listen, but then just shook his head and said I should get some rest. I was not tired. I went back to the room and shut the door. The piano playing happened until about 3 in the morning. The next morning I asked about it again to a different staff member, expecting them to say, "Oh yes, Mr. So-and-so loves to practice at night." But the staff looked confused. She said, "Our piano hasn't been played in months. The tuning is overdue." This happened almost every single night, except on the 4th night it started earlier, at say 1:30 in the morning. It was a faster and kind of chaotic sound. It sounded like the musical equivalent of, say, somebody calling for help. It sounded frustrated. I didn't go downstairs that time because I really didn't want to encounter whatever was playing in that. I was pretty sure nobody was at the piano anyway. At one point, the melody stopped abruptly, only to start again a couple of seconds later, really, really low, and then a violent sweep of higher notes, like somebody had dragged their fingers across the key. Somebody was clearly mad. That song continued until dawn. Although song is kind of not the right word. The next night, which was the last night of my trip, I decided to leave a light on and just ride it out. I didn't wander the halls or go look or anything, and predictably at this point, at about 2:10 in the morning, the melody came back. But this time, it was really sweet, almost tender. It was almost like a farewell. Completely different than the previous night. But this night, it never paused. By morning, everything was silent again. The hotel hummed with tourists eating breakfast and luggage rolling and staff chatting, and the world felt normal. On the way out, I had almost convinced myself that I was just hearing things. Before checking out, I walked into the lobby one last time. Sunlight poured through the high windows. The piano looked ordinary and dusty and relatively untouched. As I stepped away, though, I noticed something that I hadn't seen right away. A faint set of fingerprints on the glossy surface. Dustless patches, like someone had rested their fingers lightly on the piano during the night and lifted them before anybody ever arrived. I left Vienna that afternoon. The melody still plays in my head sometimes. The nice one, anyway. And every time it does, or I catch myself humming it, I wonder who or what was playing that night. The Old Man's Warning by Anonymous. I went to Florence last summer on a solo trip after a friend bailed last minute. It was hot, crowded, and honestly overwhelming at first. But the city has this way of getting under your skin. Narrow alleys that twist unexpectedly, old stone everywhere, streetlights that seem too dim for how bright the days are. I stayed in a small hotel near Piazza della Signoria and spent most nights wandering around after tourists cleared out. On my second night, I stopped at a little cafe on a side street. It was late, maybe 10:30, and I was lingering over a drink when an older man walked in. He looked like he belonged in an old photograph. Worn jacket, slow gait, deeply lined face. He sat at the table next to mine, nodding politely. We exchanged a few words, simple stuff about the heat, how busy the city was. His English was accented but clear. After a few minutes, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Do not walk down Via del Giglio tonight," he said. "You understand. After dark, avoid it." It wasn't aggressive or even dramatic. He said it the same way someone might warn you about a broken step. I asked him why. He shook his head. "Not safe. Not tonight." And then he finished his drink and left without another word. I should have listened, or at least taken it seriously. But there was nothing threatening about the street name itself, and people give dumb tourist warnings all the time. I figured it was an old man being superstitious, or maybe there had been a mugging there and he didn't know how to explain it. Later that night, around midnight, I decided to walk anyway. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just restless and figured I'd take the long way back to the hotel. The air had cooled, and Florence at night is beautiful. Soft shadows, the smell of stone cooling off, the distant sound of water from fountains. When I reached the beginning of Via del Giglio, it didn't look any different from any other narrow cobblestone alley nearby. It was just a quiet, dimly lit street, empty except for a few shuttered shops. I stepped onto it without thinking. At first, everything was fine. My footsteps echoed because the street was so tight and enclosed. I remember noticing how the streetlights felt weaker here, almost like the bulbs were older, giving off this tired yellow glow. About halfway down, I heard another sound. Footsteps, behind me. Soft at first, matching the rhythm of my walk so closely that it took a few seconds for my brain to even register it. When I slowed, the footsteps slowed. When I stopped, they stopped. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one. The street was empty from end to end. No one had a door open. There were no corners someone could have ducked behind. It was just stone walls and shuttered windows. I told myself it was just the echo of my own steps, bouncing weirdly in the narrow street. Sound does strange things in old cities, especially between tall buildings, so I kept walking. The footsteps started again almost immediately, but this time they were slightly out of sync, half a beat behind mine, like whoever or whatever was following me had adjusted their pace. I stopped again. Silence. I turned slowly, scanning the windows. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. The whole street felt like it was holding itself still. I took one step backward. One soft step answered from somewhere behind me. That was the moment my stomach dropped. It wasn't my echo. It didn't match. I started walking faster. Not running, but just moving with purpose. The footsteps behind me sped up too. Still that faint, steady sound of someone walking lightly on stone. Not rushing necessarily, just following. I reached the end of the street and didn't stop. I turned right and then left, heading toward the better lit areas near my hotel. The moment I left Via del Giglio, the footsteps faded. I kept going until I reached the main square, where people were still sitting and talking. I stood there catching my breath, trying to act normal. Curiosity got the better of me, and I turned back to look at the entrance of the street I'd just come from. There was no one there, but the air in that little stretch of darkness looked heavier somehow, like the shadows were still settling back into place after being disturbed. The next morning I went back to the cafe. The old man wasn't there. I asked the barista about him, described the warning. She didn't seem confused, but she didn't offer any details either. She just gave a little shrug and said, "Some streets here, they have their stories." I didn't ask anything else. I left Florence a few days later, but one strange thing stuck with me. Every night since then, if I'm walking alone and the street suddenly goes quiet, I get the same sensation I felt on Via del Giglio, like someone has matched their pace to mine, just far enough behind to stay out of sight. I always tell myself it's nothing, just jumpy from the experience, and I'm sure that's true. But sometimes when I stop walking, I swear I hear one extra step land somewhere behind me, soft and delayed, like it's reminding me that it's still there. The Shifting Portrait. I rented a tiny room in Venice for a long weekend last fall. It was one of the older buildings near Carriage, where the walls lean a bit and every floorboard groans like it's complaining about still being there. I picked the place because it was cheap and close to the Vaporetto stop, not because it had charm. The listing showed generic photos, a bed, a desk, a little window overlooking an alley. What the photos didn't show was the portrait. It hung above the small dresser, an old oil painting in a heavy, cracked wooden frame. The subject was a man, maybe in his 50s, dressed in dark clothing. He had a sharp nose, thin mouth, and eyes that seemed too intense for a guest room. The varnish had yellowed enough that he looked like he was staring through smoke. I noticed it immediately when I checked in. I hate portraits of strangers watching me sleep, but I didn't want to be dramatic, so I left it alone. The first night, nothing weird happened. I was exhausted, wandered the city until midnight, came back, and pretty much passed out. The next morning, I looked at the portrait while brushing my teeth, and just felt weird. I couldn't explain it at first. Something about his posture looked different. His shoulders seemed angled slightly more toward the bed. I told myself it was jet lag and a trick of the light. The morning sun came through the blinds in stripes, and old paintings always look different depending on the shadow and angle, so I shrugged it off. That night, though, I swear his eyes were pointed more to the left. Not cartoonishly following me, just subtly shifted, like his gaze had wandered a few inches in my direction. I stood there staring at it for a good minute, feeling stupid for even questioning reality like that. I took a photo with my phone, mostly to reassure myself. The painting looked normal in the picture, static, unthreatening. Someone had told me once that a good portrait, whether a photo or a painting, will look like it's looking at you no matter where you are in the room. Maybe, I thought, it was just a good portrait. Still, something bothered me enough that I turned the frame slightly to the side before bed, just so the man was not staring straight at me. When I woke the next morning, the frame was straight again. It was perfectly aligned and centered, as though someone had corrected it in the night. And the man's eyes were definitely, unmistakably looking more directly at the bed. I felt a cold pinch of fear then. I checked my phone pic from the day before and compared them side by side. Maybe it was my imagination, but the angle of his head looked different. In the photo, he'd been staring slightly off to the right. In person, he was angled a few degrees left. Subtle, barely noticeable, but there. I considered taking the painting completely off the wall or flipping it around, but it felt rude somehow, like I'd be messing with something that didn't want to be touched. That night, I barely slept. Every time I opened my eyes, the portrait was there in the corner of the room, dimly lit by the street lamp outside, just a dark rectangle with the faint outline of a man staring out. At around 4 a.m., I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. The man's head had shifted again. He was angled even further toward the bed, almost like he was leaning in slightly. It wasn't like a grotesque horror movie kind of way, just enough that the difference hit me in the stomach. I took another photo. Side by side, the change was clear. I turned the painting around to face the wall and went back to bed. A few hours later, I awoke to the feeling of being watched. The painting was not flipped anymore. It was hanging the right way around, frame perfectly centered, and the man's eyes were looking straight at me. I packed my bag, fully intending to check out early, but curiosity, or stupidity, made me knock on the owner's door first, something she had told us we could do. She was an older woman, friendly but distracted, like somebody who had too many things on her mind. I told her as gently as possible that the portrait in my room was making me uneasy. She froze for just a moment and then said, "Ah, you have room number 3. I asked what that meant. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "The man in the portrait was the previous owner, a very private one. He disliked guests, but the room remembers him." I didn't really know what to say to that. And then she added, "He never did care for being moved." There was something almost apologetic in her tone, like she was talking about a still-living relative who refused to adapt. I checked out within the hour. I switched to a modern hotel near Rialto, one with bright lighting, clean white walls, and absolutely zero historic charm. It felt like a hospital in comparison, but I slept better, mostly. 2 days after I left the apartment, I was scrolling through my phone to delete photos and free up some space. I found the 2 pictures I'd taken of the portrait and compared them again, but something was wrong. The first photo, the one that I had taken that morning, the one where he'd been staring slightly to the right, his eyes were pointed at me now, dead on. just like the second one. I checked the metadata. Same file, same timestamp, no duplicates. The portrait had changed in the photo, even though I hadn't touched it. For a long time, I stared at it and debated if I was losing my mind, or if the camera app had glitched, or if the hotel, I don't know, Wi-Fi had done something freaky. None of those explanations made any sense. I deleted the images, and I don't think I'll be staying in hotels with historic charm ever again. The Woman in Black. I lived in Sydney, Australia for a couple of years in my late 20s. I rented a tiny apartment near Coogee Beach because it was close enough to walk to the water after work, which was the only part of the day that did not feel like a grind. I used to go down there at night, especially when the air was heavy and warm, and everyone else had gone home. The ocean at night feels like a different world. Bigger, quieter, like the horizon shifts a little when you're not paying attention. This happened on a Thursday in early spring. Warm breeze, waves rolling slow and steady, a bit of mist hanging low over the shoreline. I wasn't tired, but I wasn't awake either, just that end of the workday autopilot state. I walked the path that runs along the cliffs, and finally cut down toward the sand. I remember thinking the tide seemed farther out than usual, more exposed rock and less white noise. And that's when I saw her. She stood maybe 30 feet from the waterline, facing the ocean. A woman dressed completely in black. Long dress, dark hair, unmoving even though the breeze was strong enough to push my shirt around. At first I thought she might have been a night swimmer or someone doing some kind of meditation ritual. People in Sydney do weird things on the beach all the time. You learn not to ask questions. But something about her posture bothered me. Her shoulders were straight but too still. No shift of weight, no tilt of the head. I slowed down, debating whether I should keep walking or turn around. It's not like I wanted to look like some creep wandering up to a lone woman in the dark, but she wasn't reacting to me at all, and the longer I watched her, the more it felt like she wasn't really looking at the ocean, more like she was waiting for something. I stepped onto the sand, my shoes sinking a little, and she finally moved. She didn't turn all the way around, just angled her head, barely enough that I saw the outline of her jaw. Pale, sharp, no reflection off her eyes. Maybe the lighting just hit weird, but it made my chest tighten. I asked, "Are you okay?" Not loud, but enough that any normal person would at least shift or acknowledge the sound. She didn't. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, like she'd heard something I hadn't, and took a single step forward into the foam. The waves were calm. No undertow, nothing dangerous, but the way she walked into them felt wrong, like she expected to be carried somewhere. I said something again, I don't even remember what. Maybe telling her the tide was coming in, telling her to wait. I picked up my pace and closed the distance by a few steps. She kept walking. The water reached her calves and then her knees. The hem of her dress floated around her in this slow way, like it had weight to it and wasn't just fabric. The mist thickened near her, like it was gathering around her, like it knew her. I reached the spot where her footprints should have been, but the sand was smooth. There were no impressions or marks, nothing dragged or scuffed. I froze. She was now waist deep, still moving with that same steady pace, not shivering or reacting at all. I blinked. The mist rolled a bit, and she was suddenly a few feet farther out than she should have been able to walk in the time it took me to inhale. I don't scare easily, but something instinctive kicked in. It just made me want to leave without looking like I was running. I forced myself to keep watching, though. I needed to know if she was actually drowning or if this was some weird trick of the fog. The waves broke around her, but she didn't move with them. Not even a sway. And then she turned. Not her body. Her head did a full rotation toward me. From that distance, I should have seen her face clearly. But there was nothing. Just absence, like her face had been erased, and the mist filled the space where features should have been. My knees locked. My stomach flipped. I remember thinking, this is not a person. It wasn't even fear first. It was confusion so sharp it felt physical. She lifted her arm, palm facing me, like she was gesturing or reaching. I don't really know. Her hand looked normal enough. But then another wave rolled in, higher this time, and it went straight through her. It didn't go around her, it just went through her. Her shape dissolved into the white water, like smoke caught in a gust. One moment she was there, and the next the mist swallowed her. There was no splash or sinking or struggle at all. She was just gone. I walked straight into the water before I could talk myself out of it. The cold shocked me up to my ankles and then knees. I scanned the surface, waiting for a head or an arm or something to break through, but nothing ever did. The mist eased back a bit, and the ocean went flat, like nothing had been there at all. I stood waist deep for maybe 5 minutes. Eventually, a wave hit hard enough to push me backward, and that snapped me out of it. When I got back onto the sand, I checked again for footprints. Mine were there, but hers weren't, not even near the dry part of the beach. I walked home soaking wet. I didn't shower or sleep. I just sat on my couch staring at the dark TV screen, like it might replay what I had seen. The next morning, I went back around sunrise. I don't know why. Part of me thought I'd find a piece of fabric washed up, or that the tide would reveal some logical explanation. The beach was clean. The waves were normal. Lifeguards were setting up chairs like it was any other day. I tried to tell myself it was fog distortion, or a trick of the light, or exhaustion. But I've been in all those situations before. A person does not just vanish into mist. I didn't go back to the beach at night after that. Even years later, now, I can't do it. I don't know what she was, but I have no desire to encounter her again. Someone Waiting Outside by Naomi T. I lived alone for 3 years in an old apartment building just outside Nakano in western Tokyo. It was one of those narrow concrete walk-up buildings where the doors all face a shared balcony-like corridor that runs the length of the floor. Every unit looked the same. Metal doors, frosted glass windows, single gas heaters, and paint peeling like dried paper. Rent was cheap, and that was enough for me back then. I worked at a small design firm in Shibuya, long hours, often back home after midnight. The building itself was quiet, which I liked. Most tenants were old men or night workers. You rarely saw anyone in the hallway. The odd thing started the second winter I lived there. It was around 1:30 a.m. I'd just gotten home, made tea, and sat down to check emails when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, even, and pacing. I figured it was just one of my neighbors going to the shared sink or smoking area, but the steps stopped right outside my door. Nobody knocked, but nobody moved away either. They just stayed there. The sound was not faint. The echo in those concrete corridors made every step distinct. I remember sitting very still, waiting for the next one. After maybe 10 seconds of silence, I got up and looked through the peephole. No one there. The fluorescent light outside flickered once, and that gave me just enough detail to see the corner. Completely empty. The air was still. I stood there for a full minute before convincing myself the sound must have come from upstairs. The floors were thin and carried noise. I crawled into bed and didn't think much more of it. It happened again 3 nights later. Some pacing, halt at my door. I froze mid-scroll on my phone, listening to the rhythm slow until it stopped at the same point. This time, when I looked through the peephole, the light above my door was off. It didn't turn back on until after I pulled my face away. That bothered me. Those hallway lights were on sensors, motion sensors. There had to be motion nearby to keep them active. I asked my upstairs neighbor the next morning if I'd woken him walking late or if anyone else had complained about noise. He looked puzzled, told me his room was on the opposite side and that no one even lived in the unit above mine. It had been empty for months. The following Sunday, it escalated. I'd fallen asleep on the futon while watching something on my laptop and woke to muffled footsteps, but this time they didn't come from far down the corridor. They began right outside. Steady, slow, dragging steps, going 4 or 5 paces one way, 4 or 5 back. The pattern was so precise it didn't sound human. I lay still, barely breathing, pretending to sleep. The pacing stopped once more near the door. Then the handle rattled, softly, like someone trying it with caution. I didn't move. The only sound was my heartbeat pounding against the thin wall between us. Whoever it was didn't knock, just lingered long enough for me to lose track of seconds. When I finally grabbed the courage to get up, I took 1 step toward the door and heard that same pattern of steps, but now moving away, slow and clear, turning the corner until they faded. That was the first night I left the light on while sleeping. Over the next week, it became routine, always between 1 and 2 in the morning. Steps, stop, wait, nothing else. Once I heard the sound of shuffling, a shoe dragging slightly. Other times it circled close to my door as if tracing the threshold. One night I pressed my ear against the metal, and I swore I could hear faint breathing on the other side. I started leaving the TV on low to drown it out. Out of desperation, I asked the landlord about it. His reaction chilled me more than the noise ever had. When I mentioned the pacing, his face tightened subtly, and then he said, "That building carries sound strangely. Try earplugs." When I pushed, he told me something strange about the property. Years ago, before they renovated, the place had been weekly rental housing for single workers. One tenant, a reclusive woman, disappeared. They found her weeks later after neighbors complained of a smell. She'd collapsed in front of her own door, key in hand, as if trying to get out. Her unit? Mine. He said that was 15 years ago, and that he only mentioned it so I wouldn't imagine things, and then apologized for saying too much. That night, everything went quiet for the first time in weeks. It was almost worse. The silence felt staged, like whoever had been walking was waiting for me to stop expecting it. I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I finally got up, turned off the TV, and opened the window to hear anything else. Wind, traffic, the city breathing, anything. It grounded me. And then, behind me, the floorboards creaked once. My eyes darted to the door. The light in the corridor came on by itself. No footsteps followed, just the faint buzz of the old fluorescent bulb. When I leaned close to the peephole, at first it showed the usual empty stretch. But then I realized what was wrong. The light outside my door was the only one on. Every other one down the hall was dark. There was movement, barely perceptible shadows shifting by the railing on the left side. My heart jammed in my throat. It looked like the edge of a shoulder, leaning forward. I blinked. Nothing. Then abrupt blackness. The hallway light went out. When I backed away, my phone screen lit up behind me. A text from a coworker sent hours earlier. Quote, "Your building's kind of creepy. I could hear footsteps when I dropped off your bag." End quote. I had left my spare key with her that day because she had stored some of her stuff in my room before moving. She said she came by at about 8, heard pacing, assumed that I was home, but I hadn't returned until after 10. The pattern hasn't left me since. Last year, I moved closer to Kichijoji. New building, better neighborhood, thicker walls. I don't talk about that apartment anymore, though. Sometimes I still dream about that thin concrete corridor, glowing under bad fluorescent light. Every dream is the same. I'm standing at my door, holding the handle from the inside, listening as someone shifts their weight barely a meter away. The sound doesn't frighten me now, but what happens next always wakes me up. The moment when it stops pacing and crouches down, right up against the door, matching its breath to mine like it's learned the rhythm. Sometimes when I wake up, I still hear that faint scuffling behind whatever door separates me from the next place I live. It always passes after a few minutes, and I always figure it's just my imagination. But the thing I can't stop noticing is that every building I move into, no matter how new, my door is always scratched at the base, like something's worn the paint away by waiting.